I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're tackling some of the biggest questions of all time about faith, history, and the very existence of God. The name of the book, God's Existence, Deeper Thoughts for Greater Insights, written by a terrific author. His name is Gary Lindberg, and he challenges traditional perspectives on evolution, Genesis, and the truth behind biblical events. This thought-provoking book is a must-read for anyone seeking deeper insights into the mysteries of creation, history, and spirituality. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below the interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app, streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Gary, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Well, Logan, thank you very much for taking time to talk with me this morning or this afternoon, I guess. And it's an honor and a pleasure to talk with you.
The honor and the pleasure are all mine, sir. This is a great book. It's so insightful. And I guess the purpose of this book, in some ways, is to bridge the gap between science and faith.
Well, I try to look at science and faith, or actually science and Christianity, as being part of the same kind of thing. When I was young, I was thinking about who created the Bible. Well, obviously, to me, the Bible was created by God because He created the universe and all that's in it. And then I thought, well, who created science? Well, then that answer was pretty obvious to me also. God created science because, as I said, He created the universe and everything was in it. So I felt that even in my young life, it seemed to me that if God created the Bible and God created science, they pretty much must say the same thing or be very compatible. So that's kind of how I approached the subject in my book.
Absolutely. So does evolution contradict the Bible, or does it align with God's creation?
Well, that's one of my questions that I ask in the book, which I invite readers to read. I asked, does evolution contradict the Bible, or is the evolution a tool that God used to create?
And I guess people will fall on that question in a number of different ways. I never felt that the two are incompatible. I felt as part of creationism, God could have created evolution. I mean, I think it's kind of like you know, more of a logical way of creation rather than God pointing a finger and saying, let there be light, let there be man, let there be trees, that kind of thing, to have things actually evolve. And I don't think it actually contradicts the Bible at all. That's my feeling. That's my thought. Am I on target in your opinion?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what I think as well. Because if God created the universe and all that's in it, then we know that the Earth according to scientists, was created 4.54 billion years ago, but the universe was created 13.7 billion years ago. So it falls in line very well, I think.
Exactly. Although I don't know if I evolved from a little sea creature. I'm not sure about that. The jury's still out on that. But I do think there was some kind of evolutionary process, no doubt. I don't think man fully understands it yet. And I think that's part of the conflict, don't you think?
I agree with you. And I think that I talk about evolution and get into it in more depth. And I cover all the different species. There are about 13 different human species that existed over the years after the Earth was created. And one by one, those species became extinct. Well, I think that process was controlled by God. And what happened between 13.8 billion years and 4.54 billion years is a long-term evolution. God created the universe first, then he created the solar systems and our sun, and he created then the planets. And
Mhm.
he did it in logical order. And that's the only way it makes sense.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your background. How long have you been interested in this stuff? Would you say your background is more in science or more in faith or more in religion? Or tell us about that aspect of you.
Well, it is a little bit of all that. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, uh, and lived there about 7 years before I moved. My parents, I should say, moved to Santa Maria, California, which is located about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Mhm.
And there I went to school, grew up, and finally, after high school, I moved on to the University of California, Berkeley, where I majored in U.S. history.
Mhm.
And after I finished history, I uh, decided to volunteer for the Peace Corps. Sergeant Shriver, John Kennedy's brother-in-law, came to visit our campus many times, and I decided I'd rise to his challenge. And so I served in the Ivory Coast in West Africa uh, to teach primary school children how to grow vegetables more effectively in a tropical climate. And following the my Peace Corps service, I was then old enough to be drafted because in those days the Vietnam War was still going on,
Mhm.
and I was then the ripe old age of 25 and prime candidate to be drafted.
Right.
Instead of accepting the draft, I decided to volunteer for the Navy, and I served my 4 years and completed my military service. And then I went to San Francisco State University after my military service to earn my Master of Business Administration degree in management and personnel.
Hmm.
And following that, I started my 43-year career in human resources. And of course, during all the time, I am a very religious person. So I had some thoughts in that area. And but then at the age of 76 in November 2019, I decided I should retire and pursue my personal interests. Well, it turns out that my personal interests happened to be writing a couple of books. So that's what I did.
Wonderful. Well, you're a real Renaissance man. This is quite a ride. One, you look much younger than your actual years, which is a wonderful thing. And obviously, it's because you've kept so active. And I think that's a great thing. But, Peace Corps, a sailor in the Navy, graduate student, undergraduate student, a successful career in human resources, and now an author. And so I think those are all wonderful accomplishments. And this book is wonderful. I think it really shows a lifetime of thinking and a lifetime of philosophical thought went into this work.
Yes, sir. I think all of it added up, and uh, having history as a background was not something I intended to teach after finishing school. I only wanted to take it to learn to have a broader perspective of
Mm.
different things. And I thought that was helpful in doing that. And that's why I can see certain things that other people don't seem to perceive, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Genesis. What do you believe Genesis really tells us about creation?
Well, that's an interesting subject and one I like a lot. When you talk about Genesis, I think I found that the chapter 1, verse 1 gave us an overall view of creation, the various steps that God followed in creating everything. But I also found out that it was not quite accurate.
Mhm.
And so I proposed in my book a revised version, if you will, of the steps. For example, the uh, about the in the first day, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was good. But so he said he called the light day and the dark night. Well, how do you have light on the first day? Well, then they talk in verse 4, they talk about God created the sun and the stars. And like I've already indicated, God created the universe, and that includes stars and the sun before he created the earth. And so when he said, let there be light, he had already created the sun because he had created the earth and the stars, which included a lot of suns. And so when he created the planets, all he had to do was move the planets, the Earth and all the other planets in our solar system over to the sun, or the sun over to the planets. And it was a much different process than the Genesis describes. And I also found out that there's a second version of creation in Genesis. That starts at chapter 2, verse 4. But that version indicates a few little details. They may have created man before they created animals, or whatever those things are. But the whole thrust of that second version is a description of Adam and his descendants. It's not talking about creation. And my theory is that the writers initially decided that the first version, which was the verse chapter 2, verse 4, was an inadequate description of the universe and creation. So they rewrote, or other people, successors or whoever, rewrote that story and came up with chapter 1, verse 1, and the following verses. And so they really didn't want to discard the first original version, as I claim it is, because it had a good description of Adam and his family and descendants. So they kept them both, although it's a little bit strange when you see certain things in that second version.
Absolutely. How should we interpret the story of Adam and Eve in today's world?
Well, that's a good question. They say there's no archaeological evidence to prove that they even existed. Some people want to say they're kind of an analogy of what really happened. I don't know that we can prove that they didn't exist or that they did exist. I don't think there's really solid evidence either way. But because they do list their descendants, you got 10 generations from Adam down to Noah. It gives me some thought that maybe they were real, but they weren't created. They weren't the first humans were created. The first humans were the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons and the Denisovans and the Homo sapiens and the Homo erectus and all those other different species that were created. And all that evolution occurred billions of years before Adam and Eve were even thought of.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've always thought myself, and this might just be from my religious background, I was raised Catholic, that leaned very heavily, of course, to the New Testament, that stories in the Old Testament were more or less stories to teach you values and morals and ideas and concepts, that they weren't to be taken literally. Do you believe that a little bit? Do you believe that not at all, or somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm probably more in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't think that everything. I find that there are a lot of mistakes in the Bible, because when I was young, I asked myself, who created the Bible? Well,
Yeah.
God created the Bible, but because he inspired people to write it and organize it. Well, that doesn't mean that God sat down with all the writers and said, "Now you write this word, that word, and that sentence, and that sentence. Yeah,
Right.
you just follow what I tell you to do." He did.
Yeah.
The question is, did the writers fully perceive or discern what God really was telling them. Well,
Right.
in some cases they did, some cases they didn't. But there are some valuable lessons in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And, I think that I also ask, why did the writers write the Old Testament? There's a purpose in that. And the purpose was I was reading the book, um, The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, who was talking about all the different groups that existed, the different Israelites. You had, of course, now we know about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and even the Essenes, but there were a lot of groups and they had different ideas and different beliefs. Well, the purpose of the Bible was to unite all those different groups into one unified Israelite people. And according to the authors, they succeeded in doing that.
Mhm.
So I think that there are a lot of errors in the New Testament as well,
Mhm.
and so there's contradictions. In I want to say the French word in pagaille, and in spades and many forms.
Mhm.
And one thing we have to understand is that different people have different perspectives of what happened, and those different perspectives. Certain points are very important to somebody and not important to other people. Whereas vice versa, it can be the difference between everybody has a different point of view, and that doesn't make it all right. But together, it makes it a little bit more complete of a picture.
Absolutely. When you were saying that there was interpretation issues with God and revelation in the Bible, I was going to say it'd be nice if God had a dictaphone back then and could just dictate exactly what he wanted, but it didn't work
Right.
exactly like that. It was open up to the interpretation of men as well when they were writing it down. Gary, let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about the Great Flood?
Well, we have to, when we talk about the Great Flood and some other things, even creation, we have to define some words that were really the meanings of those words at the time, 6,000 years ago, or whenever it was they wrote those scriptures in the Bible. Uh, for example, a day in a life of creation, a day would be millions of years from the perspective of God, but 24 hours in the perspective of a human being. And that does, God, as you already mentioned, God is not a magician. He snaps his fingers and voila, you have a human being or an animal or whatever. Uh, and the same thing is true with the Great Flood. We have to define what is the definition of the word earth. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions I think we have, because today we think that since the Bible says the flood covered the whole earth, we assume that term in terms of our 21st century thinking. That's not the thinking of 6,000 years ago or whenever the Great Flood was. The Great Flood did not cover the pyramids of Egypt. It did not cover North America or South America. It didn't cover over Mount Everest in Tibet or China or India or Europe or Russia or Australia. So it did not cover the whole earth.
Mhm.
That's where I say that people have a different perspective. And also, we need to realize that people make mistakes. They exaggerate, they embellish, and that's a case of an embellishment, not by purpose, but by our misinterpretation of what they said. So when they say that it covered the whole earth, they're talking in terms of what uh, what space or area of the territory were they familiar with? They were
Mhm.
familiar with, I think, mainly the Mesopotamia Valley. So the whole earth was the Mesopotamia Valley. That's what they intended to say and what they really meant. And we jumped to the conclusion and fall all over ourselves thinking, oh, they covered everything, and so therefore the whole Bible is false. How can you come to believe that anything in the Bible is true when that is obviously not true?
Right.
That kind of thing. And so I'm saying that probably the description of the ark itself is probably overextended. And when they first started talking about the Bible, they didn't, or the Old Testament, they didn't tell you the Old Testament because it wasn't written then. It was
Hmm.
oral, all oral history. And over time, you have people changing things. You heard the story about the man who caught a fish. Well, when he goes home and carries the fish, he tells his friends and neighbors, "Oh, I caught this fish. It is a huge fish. It is large, and you can't believe how heavy and how much work I had to
Exactly.
do to get this fish in." And then you find out it was a little minnow or something very small. And so that's what happened with the description of the ark. It
Sure.
wasn't as large as it was, and as described. And the rain may have lasted 40 days and 40 nights. I can't define that, but
Right.
there are certain things you can see that are pretty well exaggerated. So and when they collected the animals, they didn't collect all the animals from the North America or Australia and uh, uh, the North Pole and everything. They collected the animals, probably mostly domestic animals, in their location,
Right.
and that's what. So those are kinds of things that we've gotten wrong, and especially when we try to criticize the story.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like you said, people embellish, people exaggerate. And also there was likely an oral tradition of passing down these passages in the Bible before
Yeah.
they were written, before the Gutenberg press came to, set into print exactly. So it was a little bit of a game of telephone along the way as well, I'd imagine, right?
Oh, I think so. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. What new insights did you discover about the Exodus?
Well, I discovered that there's really no evidence that Moses existed.
Mhm.
But am I going to take that as a fact that he never really existed, or am I going to just simply say there's no evidence that he existed? And I think when the Pharaoh exiled Moses, or when Moses left Egypt, however it happened, uh, Moses was supposed to be stricken from all the records of Egypt, and according to the Pharaoh's order. Well, how did they notify people about Moses? Well, they built obelisks and statues and different things like that. And so when you destroy all that, you destroy all the evidence.
Mm.
The some people like to claim that the Egyptian records were so good, they were perfect, and they just didn't make mistakes. They were uh, the best things since sliced bread.
Mhm.
Well, I don't think that was true at all. They were sloppy in many ways, in some ways, and in some ways they were probably deceptive, because it was not in their interest to promote Moses or to say how wonderful he was, and allow that myth to extend to their own people. They didn't want the Pharaoh to be chasing in the along the to the Red Sea, or Reed Sea, as I really express it,
Mm.
and think that the Pharaoh was chasing after this great man, and so their interest is also involved in this. And so I think that Moses was a real person, did exist, but there's no evidence of it. But if it was any person other than the Pharaoh, we don't know a whole lot about a lot of people there. So how is it any different?
Exactly. There are limitations to history, and that, of course, is one of them. What are some of the surprising revelations in your book that readers might not expect? Is there something that during your research you found that kind of even surprised you?
Well, one thing that surprised me was that Christians have a strong fear of science and of evolution. And I couldn't figure out why that was. And then I finally realized that those few Christians who have that kind of attitude are afraid of being believing in evolution and the Bible at the same time, and they feel that they're opposites to each other. The evolution is opposite to the Bible, and the Bible is opposite to evolution. So they uh, they they fear that they're going to be called double-minded, and they don't want to accept that. When I realized that God actually created the Bible and created science, it resolved the issue for me to realize that they're both pretty much compatible if they don't say exactly the same thing. And when I was in the Peace Corps, uh, I heard this song in French that I was very familiar with, and the name of the song was La Toile de ma Maison, which means the roof of my house. Well, that wasn't the title in English. The title in English was Green, Green Grass at Home, sung by Tom Jones. And if you're going to translate Green, Green Grass at Home, you have to say Verte, verte, la pelouse de la maison, and that's not the same words. And different languages say the same thing. Hebrew does not have certain words we have in English, and vice versa. Greek, the same thing. And so when we're talking about different things, we have to realize what the real meaning is. When they translate the Bible, they're not translating it word for word all the time. They're translating it meaning for meaning,
Exactly.
so they get the gist of what the writers intended to say, not what they actually said. And
Exactly.
so that's one thing that I was surprised about. And then I realized that the evolution, there were 13 different species of humans, as I've already mentioned, the Cro-Magnons, Neanderthals, and so forth. Well, if as you look through evolution, you see that the the different species, one by one, became extinct. Until now, we only have one human species. Now, we may have characteristics of the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, but there's basically one human species, and that's Homo sapiens. And the official name is Homo sapiens sapien. That's the official name according to the biologists. How they got that, I don't know. I don't know, and it doesn't matter to me. But that's another thing that I found out, and I just realized that there's so much that the Bible says that we cannot prove, but we cannot disprove it either.
Mm.
And uh, I was reading another book about science and Darwin's theory. Um, and by the way, I want to say that I do not believe in the common ancestry that the Darwinian theory claims. I think that that is a mistake, a false statement. But
Mm.
they this book was saying the absence of evidence does not mean that it's not true. Basically, is what it was claiming. And so I think that's an important factor too.
Absolutely. Lots of important facts, lots of important opinions, lots of important theories contained within the pages of this book. It is called God's Existence, Deeper Thoughts for Greater Insights. In it, Gary challenges traditional perspectives on evolution, Genesis, and the truth behind biblical events. This thought-provoking book is a must-read for anyone seeking deeper insights into the mysteries of creation, history, and spirituality. Gary, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Well, thank you, Logan. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
The pleasure is all mine, sir, and thank you for your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.